Renaissance Florence was something like 50,000 people. And look what it produced. So you don't need this enormous city to produce something that moves the needle. And in particular, I think certain remote work trends and things have enabled some of the preconditions that allow there to be sufficient wealth and sufficient opportunity, but also sufficient engagement with digital media or whatever in a way that can allow a small group of people who are together to build that city on the hill or set an example or come together in ventures that can actually shape the country. Yeah. And that's exciting. I mean, that is fundamentally what draws people to new founding.
Maybe we jump into some of the recent projects that we've done, maybe starting with what we did over the weekend and some of what we're thinking there. You want to kick us off, Josh?
Certainly. So we just got back from an undisclosed location in the mountains of Appalachia, scouting land and looking at doing a pretty big real estate deal up there. A lot more details to come on that, but it's an organic outgrowth of something that we've been involved with for some time now. New Founding became a partner with Ridge Runner earlier this year. Ridge Runner is a company that's selling land out in southern Kentucky. It was born out of a recognition of the changing demographics coming out of COVID. And, of course, remote work sort of enabled a pretty historic movement to new locations. And certain parts of the country have been transformed already by that. Tennessee, Idaho, Florida, Texas, where we're sitting tonight. And really what the remote work revolution did coming out of COVID is it made it possible and sort of unleashed pent-up demand that was already there as best we can tell. But, 2020 was a wild time politically. I think a lot of individuals who lived and worked in cities, especially white-collar people, looked around and they realized suddenly how fragile their daily lives were, how, in many ways they had very low agency or sovereignty over very basic things like, will I be able to go to the store? And, do I have freedom of movement? Can I go in my backyard is there space where I can go without being forced to wear a mask and that sort of thing? And there was a very primordial, visceral demand that sort of increased for land. I started buying land out in the middle of nowhere back in 2020. A lot of people did. A lot of my colleagues at the time did the same. And I think the crucial thing for our conversation here is that's not slowing down. Recent studies say that about 5 million people have relocated since the pandemic started, and about 20 million still want to relocate. Of that 20 million, the majority want to relocate to small towns or rural areas, and the overwhelming majority are conservative. And there's a political component as well to who wants to move to rural areas. Maybe not shockingly, but according to, I think it was Pew Research, 66% of Republicans want to live in a rural area or a small town. And for Democrats, that's only 33%. And that gap has widened significantly in the last 20 years. And the factors that drive it are not going to go away. Of course, there's basic things like affordability and quality of life and clean air and natural environment. But then in addition to all of that, there's cultural factors. That's how Pew measures it, by which I would take it that a material part of these cultural factors that they measure would include things like wanting to get away from drag queen story hour and the like. And then there's political, straight up political factors involved in the movement. Probably everybody's seen this at an anecdotal level, but there's good hard data on it. We think there's a ton of pent-up demand, and frankly, some of those factors, as we approach 24, another election cycle with a lot of uncertainty, I think there's good reason to believe that we could very well see another sort of similar explosive movement like what we saw in 2020. But the possibility of remote work has gotten people thinking about, how do I order my life? Like, must work dictate where I live, or can I kind of orient, my professional life around where I want to live and then proceed on that basis? And, and in particular, I think people have become much more cognizant of the importance of trusting, the importance of having neighbors that you trust, the importance of having local politicians, sheriffs, and the like that you trust. And none of that I think is going to go away as a trend. So, we've been working at Ridge Runner on some gorgeous properties in southern Kentucky, there on the Cumberland River. And then we have a new effort in the works, which is going to be a bit more ambitious in scope. But we already have strong reason to believe that we're going to see very, very strong demand for this particular project. So
there's been a lot of folks, like you say, moving out, working remote, buying land in rural areas. What for this particular upcoming project? What do you imagine that looking like in terms of community? How is this potentially different than just forging off on your own and getting a place out in the country?
Yeah, I mean, this upcoming project will probably have a diversity of real estate holdings from, raw land, residential, all the way to commercial properties. It's also going to be very probably like diverse in terms of income level of who is attracted to this project. So, we're in early discussions with some job creators, and we'd expect there to be a mix of your kind of white collar remote worker or wealthy retired family, from that all the way down to blue collar workers. And so there will be a little bit for everybody, and the real estate project's going to be very diversified in that sense. Hoping to recruit in more small business owners and people who have a business that they want to build in an area where they feel like they've got a good likelihood that they're going to have customers who like the product they're making. I think there's good reason to believe that we'll get traction on that front. Yeah.
I'll jump in with really since the beginning, New Founding has drawn an audience, and even more than an audience, I think to some extent a following of people who are excited about the possibility of a positive vision, of a positive alternative vision for where we go as a society. So a lot of conservatism has been escape. It's been you one thing gets liberal, and you break off and you form your own. But that also often means it can be very isolationist, right? You city gets bad, so you sort of move out into a more and more distant suburb. But it's really, when you're doing it alone, it really is just largely a retreat. What I think is going to be different more than anything here is it's not just a cluster of people who share values, but it's a cluster of people who are motivated early movers, many of whom have been following the New Founding Project for years, and they're people who are excited about the possibility of actively showing what an alternative can look like. And there's some of that stuff can happen in the digital. We've already been organizing people for certain things. Some of that can happen through online communities or whatever, through media. But there's a lot of that really can come together when a particularly dynamic group of people come and live together in the community. I mean, there's a lot of things where that's the only way to build that institution. So I think that what you'll see with these projects is I think a particular group of people, right? It'll be a diverse group of people, be people across a wide range of backgrounds, but the sort who move, there will be something a little bit like the sort of people who got on the boat, got on the ship, and came to the New World, and they had a very definite vision of building that city on the hill, building something aspirational.
Yeah, and to that point, the crucial thing, they're all going to have something to contribute in various ways, and you could put it differently. We're trying to solve a collective action problem. Probably a lot of people out there, I personally feel this very strongly. Like we all want we would all love, right, to be in this well-ordered local community, neighborhood, what have you, where where you know and trust various people that you transact with or just have as a neighbor every day. And but it's hard to create that out of thin air, and really, really, really hard for like the individual or maybe even a small group of friends who may know each other from social circles. What we hope to accomplish here, if we can pull it off, is kind of talking to a national audience about a particular project in a particular area. Some people are going to buy in, and you need a critical mass to really get the magic going. You need a critical mass to sustain the kinds of businesses that you would want to see. Something like having local farmers growing grass-fed beef, and having a meat processor and butcher shop like in a traditional way. There's increasing, and to support a business like that, you also then need the higher income, white collar workers who've got the refined palate who want that product. But there can be a virtuous cycle when you start connecting these people who bring different skills, maybe different aptitudes to the table. We want to very sort of intentionally help put that ecosystem together for this project in a way that I think will create uplift for a lot of different folks.
Yeah. How would you see this differently from like for people listening, the praxis type projects of looking to build a city around some kind of common shared values and alternative communities? What do you see as distinctives in what we're doing?
The first one that stands out is it's in America, and we're still doubling down on America. It's we're Americans. We're embracing American culture. It won't just be American. This will actually be embracive of the regional culture as well, and we see that as something good. Mm-hmm. I think another one will be there's probably a difference in sort of general flavor between the New Founding project and the Praxis project. I think what they're doing is admirable. I mean, we're in an era that demands
like creative thinking around.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I think people who are building are doing something that's needed there. That is the right focus for the movement. Ours is going to be more, by and large, more Christian. Distinctly and sort of openly Christian. I suspect there's Christians involved in many of these, but the anchor point of the anchor point of a lot of what we did. I mean, it's why as I started American Reformer, or as I started New Founding, almost immediately, simultaneously started American Reformer. Josh came in to build that, and in many ways the communities that we're building overlap heavily because we're seeking a positive vision, and it's a positive vision that needs to be anchored to a renewed Christian vision, a renewed Protestant vision.
Yeah.
What are the unique challenges of building those communities locally in the U.S.? Obviously, it has been done broadly for a long time. You mentioned, Pilgrim's early days. What about our current time do you think lends itself to people creating these sort of communities?
I mean, I'll start with like the very boring material conditions, but remote work is massive. Remote workers will be a cornerstone of this community, and maybe that situation doesn't persist. Maybe eventually new firms and new corporations spring up that are based on local friendships that grow into business partnerships. But at least for the time being, remote work is indisputably having a revolutionary effect on where people live, and I don't think that will ever go away personally. The market has just evolved into having a demand for that, especially high performers who've been at their firms for a good amount of time, are often just getting into a position where they can insist upon it. I don't see that materially changing in the near future. So that creates a lot of a lot of opportunity. But I think that, the real challenge, I think, is figuring out the right level of generality. What is the uniting vision that people are inspired to join? If you, if you strike it too narrowly, you have risks of purity spirals and infighting and all the rest. Ultimately, you want to attract people who are inspired by a positive vision for the future, and also want to be active participants, building themselves, getting integrally involved, building things that give them skin in the game, such that they can't walk away easily, and they're sort of bound together in a common project. And then also for people who move to join such a community, I think you want them to see a prosperous future for themselves and their family in that community, part of which means, continuing to drive economic development, economic networks and the like in local areas. So you've got to, the sine qua non is that the economic conditions do need to be there to enable people to do this sort of move.
I think there's maybe part of it too is that, just as we were thinking about it over the weekend, is that other communities like it. There will be distinctives about this in the future, but other communities like it exist already that draw people to that, like Moscow in Idaho, for example, or Batavia. Like they'll be different in their own right, but people are drawn to it. Can be done. Like you can create a center where people. I was in Moscow for a long time, and Josh was there too, and people go there because there's a positive vision, there's a structure around it, people want to build, people are building, people have built cool things, and you want to plug in and live in that way. Now, some of these communities have their own distinctives or are in regions where Moscow's up in the Pacific Northwest and Batavia's in Ohio, so other regions may be better for other folks, or Moscow's already really expensive, so it's hard to move there if you just want to start out. But to me, just based on people we've talked to, it seems like those are North Stars. Like, it can be done, it's been done. Let's replicate some of it. It'll be different in every region, but some of it in new areas of the country.
I think that's a big one. I think that actually ties into the remote work too, which is, you look at Moscow and it's a center of cultural production, right? It's not traditionally. There's been a sort of brain drain from small towns, mid-sized towns, but in some ways even more, and there's certainly been a sort of an economic drain away, but even more, you do have small towns that remain pretty well off. They have there's some business that happens to be based there or whatever, but they're still not in some sense where the action is, right? They're still, you got to go to the big metro or whatever for whether it's New York or LA or San Francisco or whatever, to really be moving the needle at a national level. And that's where I think you can look at Moscow particularly, and you can say, hey, it doesn't take a huge city, it doesn't take a huge number of people. It's actually sort of tight groups that are very motivated, that are very integrated, that are able to actually create something compelling that moves people. And that's, what kept coming up actually over the weekend was the idea that Renaissance Florence was something like 50,000 people. And look what it produced. So you don't need this enormous city to produce something that moves the needle. And in particular, I think certain remote work trends and things have enabled some of the preconditions that allow there to be sufficient wealth and sufficient opportunity, but also sufficient engagement with digital media or whatever, in a way that can allow a small group of people who are together to. They're not just going there to live a good life, but they're also going there to build that city on the hill, or set an example, or come together in ventures that can actually shape the country. Yeah. And that's exciting. That is fundamentally what draws people to new founding, I think, is that optimism. It's that idea that we see a path to change. If you're fundamentally pessimistic, you don't go build things, really, other than bunkers maybe. But I don't think we need to be. I actually think there's enormous opportunity. I think the other side is extremely fragile, and figuring out how to build right is figuring out how to build in an anti-fragile way, figuring out how to come together, build these high-trust communities. That is one of the most powerful things we can do, and it's something that offers the potential to have vast outsized impact in times of paradigm shift and turmoil.
The Nehemiah option, as it were.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've seen it throughout history.
Yeah, totally. It's very interesting all of us have talked to a lot of people building cool, interesting things this last year, and there's a sense of just general optimism, and even if they're not fully on the right, people who are building seem to be generally more optimistic, dare you say, based in many ways. And I don't think that those two are disconnected necessarily. I think there's a kind of optimism and groundedness that comes from having to look at reality as it is. Some things are good, some things you may want to change, some things may be not in your favor, but you nonetheless decide to kind of plow through and make something good out of it.
I mean, I think fundamentally what we're seeing is a lot more people are feeling a sense of freedom when they unfetter themselves from the existing status hierarchies, when they take a step out from, whatever big corrupt institution that has formerly commanded their loyalties. These institutions, people make a lot of sacrifices for them. You lose some agency and sovereignty when you decide to subordinate yourself to the interests of some large institution. You become even a high performer becomes a relatively small fish in a large pond. And that, that makes sense for, an individual who's doing that for a very healthy, large institution with a noble mission. But increasingly, people are sort of opting out. They're checking out of that path. And what else is there if you decide to check out of that path? I mean, if you lose confidence, you can remain because you need a salary, basically, which is not it's not a high integrity option. But the other thing is you can go build something new, build something inspiring. You can still do it very rigorously at a high level in a way that commands, I think, inspiration even nationally.
And I would say you're seeing this happen very clearly in the American reformer circle, where in many ways the status hierarchies, the sort of legacy institutions that were extreme in their gatekeeping were just they were incredibly mediocre. They were stagnant. They were really wedded to something that felt depressing to people. And very quickly, as groups of people came together, and as I think, in some sense, just sort of hit the moment in terms of what people were hungry for, they rallied around there was a rally around the idea of a positive alternative. And very quickly that brought out a lot of people with very clear talent in a way that, in terms of intellectual discussion and, you read it, you look at, in some cases you look at even the legacy credentials, but especially looking at the output, even independent, across a range of people from a range of backgrounds, it's clear that it's a significant step up from the legacy discourse. And so not only are you opting out of the legacy status hierarchy, I mean, there's a lot of people opt out of that. The Amish opt out of that. But it's not necessarily opt out with a vision toward impact. But you see a few groups. I mean, you've had Silicon Valley. They sort of, in some sense, they'll opt out, and they opt out in a way that actually includes a degree of recognition of the moral or the intellectual bankruptcy of the status quo. And I think you're seeing that in the Protestant world, in the evangelical world, where a lot of people are just opting out of that game, and very quickly coming up with things that are. They're compelling, they're interesting, they're certainly more interesting, sort of ironically, they're more interesting to outsiders as well. They're actually ideas that are taken seriously by people who are shaping national conversation, which in many ways is something that the legacy evangelical institutions sort of coveted. I mean, so many of their norms were shaped by this sort of coveting recognition in the legacy status hierarchy, and what it took was an opting out and a sort of self-confident pursuit of something grounded in recognition that we have we have an important truth that fills something that's been missing in society. And that's attractive, that's contagious, it's certainly something that is recognized by a growing number of people, where even a lot of people who are not from a Christian background are drawn to that form of Christianity, right? That a Christianity that is actually doubling down on its differences, on emphasizing what it offers that is missing in the world, and that's allowing us to build really just a truly different ecosystem for both intellectual discussion and also sort of institution building.
Yep. Yeah, and I think like a microcosm of that is the Christian nationalism debate, right? The, irrespective of like whether somebody particularly loves that label or not, fundamentally what's happening in that debate is very smart conservative evangelicals have basically said, that's a great descriptive label for what I want to positively advocate for. It's sort of a total, sort of essentially, it's almost like an exercise in saying, I don't care what, the broader world thinks. I'm going to, even if that's a pejorative that's thrown at me, I'll just say, okay, fine, that's what I am. And then move on forward with my like affirmative, constructive project. American Reformer hasn't, sort of taken a hard line on this, but we've platformed people who are supportive of Christian nationalism, which most places won't. And, merely for having done so, I think, I think that people have really appreciated that work, and, it gives in a time of a lot of uncertainty and then collapsing trust in existing institutions, it sort of presents this unique opportunity for Christians, I think, to assert an alternative to what's on offer, and for, again, debate the particulars, but in general, the Christian nationalism debate has represented just that. It's represented, generally very smart Christians advancing a strong vision that they have for society and for politics. And I think that partly explains why there's been sort of pretty explosive growth. I mean, I'd love to see numbers. Nobody's studied it, but I would love to actually see the rise in self-identified Christian nationalists from being a pejorative label now, I think, to being somewhat of a trendy label to self-identify as.
It's funny, you're seeing a rise across the board. Thinking even in Silicon Valley and other places of identifiers. There's Christian nationalism here. Mm-hmm. There's all sorts of debates on like broader tech, the tech world around acceleration versus, an accelerationist versus a decelerationist, and techno-optimism. And people and they don't just say these are some principles we should pursue. They're like, I am X, insert label. I don't know. What do you guys think of that?
It's a tribal. I mean, it's sort of, people want to be part of a tribe. They are drawn to that. They recognize that in many ways our society has pulled people out of it. I mean, I think sort of globalist liberal society strips people of the ability to feel like they're part of something that they belong to, and certainly some of that, a lot of that is only organically developed over generations, family, even sort of geographic place, and you're not going to rebuild that overnight. There is that draw to the local in many ways, to being around people who share. But in many ways, what you're seeing these tribes first organized digitally, and I think organize around. It's a real dilemma because in many ways, sort of, one of the criticisms a lot of people have on the right is America's a propositional nation, and it's very defined by what we believe, and yet at the same time, that is elements of that. That's certainly it's certainly an erasure of a lot of what America is, about the core. But at the same time, it's also a feature that has shaped how we think about a lot of movements, and certainly in a time where you don't have a tribal identity. People are gravitating toward other people, often who they first encounter digitally, often digitally in sort of decentralized or ungate-kept networks. They're gravitating to other people who share very, very important beliefs about the world, right? They share a critique generally of the status quo of the trajectory, and that becomes a rallying point.
And it's funny how these watching the recent dust off in the EAC world on tech, so that's effective accelerationism, with there's a leading figure, was an anonymous account, who was doxxed by Politico, or I forget which magazine. His identity was exposed, and what he was working on was exposed, and other people rallied around it. It was funny observing that from afar and seeing similar things have happened on the Christian side, Christian nationalism, where both, I guess, an EAC for the tech side and then Christian nationalism or debates surrounding that are seen as, regardless of where it's happening, these new identities, this new vision, positive visions that are being put forth are seen, detected, perceived as threatening to existing status hierarchies. So we must dox the EAC, the head of EAC to see who he is. We must shut down the debates around even questions of what does it look like to live in a post-liberal world, Christian nation.
And the vibe has shifted now too, in terms of the people being doxxed. Like this particular person in the EAC says, "All right, I'm doxxed, and here I go." He just keeps on running. Whereas maybe a year or 2 years ago, maybe those attacks would have had more weight. It feels like that is a big picture shift. Even 18 months ago, like there was a lot more pessimism, people talking about building, more ghettoized parallel type things, or saying we're going to be sent to the gulags. And then now within the last 12 months, it feels like there's much more optimistic momentum, and people saying, sure, I'm being attacked, but I don't care. We're just gonna go for it anyways.
Yeah, I mean, I think that from 2020 until 23, I mean, it was pretty clear to anybody that was basically right of center that you had to be getting your life into sort of an anti-fragile state, or at least a resilient state where you could speak freely. A lot of people have done that, but then the other elephant in the room is we can't underplay Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter, the effects of which have really been, I think, more pronounced recently this year. And that's having a major. I don't think we really appreciate. Like, we almost forgot what it's like to have a relatively free social media site. I mean, the internet's an incredibly powerful thing. That Twitter, probably Twitter is like largely credited for the Arab Spring in North Africa. It's been glowing for a very long time, probably before many of us even had accounts. And Elon's commitment to, maybe imperfectly, but his commitment to trying to keep Twitter a free platform is really remarkable, and it's changing conditions very significantly. I mean, even I think in the last couple of weeks, we had some virality around criticisms of conservative gay commentators, using surrogacy to obtain children. And those were going viral. They were ratioing the commentators, the people who are critiquing surrogacy.
Just the critique a year ago.
The critique would have gotten you banned. It certainly would have never gone viral. And what that allows, I think, is like having your fingers on the levers of these mass platforms can really shift public opinion. There are thought leaders, and then there's a lot of people who are going to try to follow the herd and get a sense of what the consensus morality is, and then go along with that. And so when you've got a platform where people are relatively free to contend for their viewpoint, it makes a big difference.
And you look at the power, you look at the extent to which that was used to artificially shape the perception of consensus before that. Yeah. I mean, in many ways, I think.
Did you see was it Al Gore recently had a video? Yeah.
Oh yeah. He wants to shut it down. He thinks
he got it right. He got it right though.
Oh yeah. It undermines.
What did he say?
he said something like, it was a video I saw it two days ago or something. He said, we need to go back to centralized TV. We need to go back to a single source of truth like newspapers. The internet has shifted the balance of power where millions of people can have different points of view, and democracy doesn't work in that way.
So what's interesting is the progressives originally had this idea. They had this techno-optimism, right? They believed Facebook's mission, its earlier mission, to make the world a more open and connected place. And you had this sort of pervasive progressive techno-liberalism in Silicon Valley, where they had this assumption that open technology would fundamentally accelerate a move of the world, an arc that bends toward leftism ultimately. And they felt confident in that. So, and that was the Arab Spring, right? The Arab Spring. I mean, the Arab Spring, elements of the technology may have been organic in a sense. It was certainly used to disrupt status quos, but their assumption was the regimes that would be disrupted were fundamentally the illiberal ones. Mm-hmm. But it was really Brexit and then Trump's election that I think shocked them into realizing that
illiberal regimes were being disrupted in those two cases as well.
It's absolutely true. They were
listen to Blake Masters.
They were not the way they perceived themselves. They were themselves subject to disruption, and technology was going to undermine, in many ways, the foundation. And I think it's far more pervasive than many assume. I think you saw this during COVID, where the entire foundation of the expert credentialed apparatus was undermined by amateurs who were calling things far more accurately than many of the credentialed experts. But during the Trump era, he was able to, more than anything, I think he was able to just change what people talked about. People could talk about things that were not within the window, the Overton window determined by the networks, by the New York Times and the credentialed gatekeepers. And that had them realize that technology was not necessarily their friend. Yeah. It could be, but I think what they realized was, and they realized ahead of many conservatives, is they realized fundamentally, no, technology is a tool, but it's a tool in many ways. Digital technology, network technology, is more like a weapon in the sense that you want to control it and you want to use it to advance your regime. And they saw the digital domain now as a domain to fight for. In many ways, I think as a layer of government, they recognized very clearly that these powerful monopoly digital platforms are de facto governments, and their policy decisions are among the most important policy decisions in the country. I think you could very easily say control over the Google algorithm is as important as many things that Congress does in terms of its influence in the country. It is a digital government, and I think they saw that this needed to be a zone, a subject, at the very least, sort of a subject of battle, but in many ways also the means of advancing their agenda. And a theater. It's a theater for this ultimate broader political war. And
Musk framed it that way at the end of the latest Joe Rogan episode.
So he realized that. What's interesting is his takeover of Twitter, everyone knew. No one had any pretense that this was anything but a political, you could think of it almost like the political conquest of a castle, and you take over the domain that comes with it. And that's a recognition that this is a digital government. And I think that's ultimately sort of the other central theme. You think of the two pillars of what New Founding's doing, and in many ways we're focused on we got to the local. The local will always matter. Who your neighbor is will always matter. But the other side is building the digital networks, really organizing the people around what I'd say is our tribe in many ways. Our tribe is anchored to a core set of values that resonate with a very large set of Americans, and in many ways are grounded in they're grounded in beliefs. They're grounded really in cultural traits that have defined America for centuries, and bringing people together and organizing them digitally, even as in many ways many of the 20th century institutions, including the legacy 20th century institutions, are actively hostile to, they're actively stamping that out, or really just atomizing and sort of deracinating people in that in that world, and we're able to digitally bring them together and really bring together the conversations that revolve around what should that look like? What is the digital age vision for our way of life?
Back to that point about localism you made. Listening to that Musk-Rogan interview, the latest one, it struck me how there's a point he makes is similar to that along those lines. At the very end, Joe asked Musk why he bought Twitter. Like, why'd you do it? And he says that he looked, I think the Twitter office is on Market Street, I think it is. He looked at Market Street, and it was just zombie land, meth and human feces everywhere and needles and all this stuff. And he's like, that's a local vision that 20 years ago, 50 years ago, would have stayed local. But what these people wanted to do was take that local vision and through Twitter, literally right there, broadcast that local nightmarish vision out to the entire world. So it's in a sense, it's sort of similar playbook. Like, take the local, create a vision for the local, broadcast it out. Their vision just happened to be zombies.
Yep. And San Francisco's a microcosm of what they want.
Yeah, no, that was literally
they have unlimited resources in San Francisco, and that is the world they choose to build.
And broadcast
and then impose.
Yeah,
yes,
the utopia. It's nuts.
Well, that capability, it's interesting going back to the small towns like Moscow. Ogden has done this too, in the reverse, in terms of, even though they're remote, media is at the point now where it's a free system, all the tech is available. You can export a culture from a complete remote, tiny place with a very small amount of manpower and have a huge impact on the larger community.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so we talked about Twitter effects. There were sort of four, or before we were recording, we talked about four sort of large, disruptive, black swanish events that happened this year. The effects of the Twitter takeover, that happened last year, but the effects were felt this year. Twitter takeover, Tucker Carlson getting fired from Fox and hopping over to X, acceleration of AI technology, and what was the fourth one?
Rifts exposed by the Palestinian Israeli conflict.
That's right. The rot that's been in like higher education, Ivy League, explicitly exposed to last year. So hop into the second one, Tucker. What do you see as kind of key lessons to be learned from the Tucker move this last year?
I just think it's very simple. Ultimately, fundamentally, the divide is a very different divide than the one that existed in the 2000s, 90s and 2000s. There is in many ways a cartel of legacy institutions that are all wedded to the same, ultimately they're wedded to the same regime, and Tucker was clearly a dissident, and a dissident was only going to be allowed on a legacy platform for so long, and they got their opportunity or went too far for them, and they ended it. And I think his move to X is a very natural one, because he is now operating in a domain that is really a center of power for a wide range of non-regime, at least to some degree, dissident players. I mean, he was recently on the All In podcast, right? That's not the conversation that would have been Tucker 4 years ago, really. That is a coalition that it reflects a group of people who are they're very centered on these new platforms. He's had a lot of conversations about Christianity in very serious ways, taking it very seriously. Again, not a topic that I think, when taking it seriously in ways that, obviously there's been sort of nods to Christianity, but there were even versions of it that were very in line with the sort of globalized liberalism.
Yeah, for a top newsacre in the country to be talking about spiritual warfare and fighting the powers of darkness, you'd have to go back a long time, I think, to find any comparable example.
Back to the positive world.
Yeah. And again, those people again are finding their voice digitally. They're not on any of the legacy elite networks. So you have him. He essentially moved into. He moved digitally into the world that is surrounded by people who are a lot friendlier.
Yeah. I think you were chatting about this recently. You made a good point that it also reveals the thinking behind the legacy gatekeepers, where in the past, firing someone like Tucker meant you're done. Like, if you're fired from a top news station,
you were buried, you were gone.
Your voice is gone, and no one else will hire you, and you're done. Like, I mean, it's what Al Gore essentially wanted to go back to, is you get one shot, you're shut down, no one wants to hire you because you're the guy they fired. You don't go anywhere else to go. You can't go to Substack, Twitter doesn't exist, none of those things exist. The fact that they fired him and probably bet on something similar happening, like, we're shutting down Tucker, essentially, just betrays the thinking, the sort of backwards or stagnant thinking behind these.
Well, these institutions are still very hubristic. And that creates opportunity.
Right.
I mean, they'll make terrible calls frequently. I mean, it was a terrible business decision to fire Tucker, and he'll go and build something where he takes more of the upside of the value that he creates.
He just launched today,
and and that's a broader reason for optimism, I think, is that these institutions that many of us have come to view as corrupt and as having had betrayed us, they're hubristic, they're incompetent, and there's a tremendous opportunity to build something that outcompetes them very quickly.
Yeah.
So,
in many ways, and this goes to how sort of one of my meta models of trust, I look at a lot of institutions as they're analogous to banks, right? Banks take deposits. Banks are brokers. They're intermediaries. They take deposits and they then lend those deposits out. They bet on things. They invest in things. Wow. They in turn reallocate trust in a way that reflects their judgment. But what you see with banks is as people lose confidence in a bank, it can spiral very rapidly, because so many people are only allocating trust because they believe that other people allocate trust. So much of the value of cable news, so much of the power, you talk to people in DC and it's clear, so much of the power of cable news, it's not about even the absolute numbers. The absolute numbers were beaten by shows like Joe Rogan a long time ago. Right. It's about the fact that they are seen as credentials. If you are on a cable news show that matters and you're talking about something, then that matters in DC. Everyone recognizes that matters. But that's the kind of thing that can disappear overnight. Once people start to recognize that it no longer matters, they no longer get to set the agenda, suddenly people have beaten that. It can be like a bank run as people start to realize, well, the absolute numbers aren't that good. The terms of the discussion are often very stupid. It's really just it is not a value. It would be like a bank that you recognize as making bad investments, is making bad loans. People can pull that trust very quickly, and you can have things that resemble a bank run as the trust disappears, and there's no fundamental underlying economics there. There's no underlying source of value. That thing can collapse, and then what you have is you have people who are rapidly. They don't want to exist at a lower level. So my background actually in business was distressed investing in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. It was buying distressed apartment buildings from banks. And what I think is notable, and that patterns what you see in the wake of a lot of crises, is people don't want to exist at a lower level. They don't want to exist at a level where these things are just owned for equity or something. They sort of rapidly recohere around new pillars. We built a company that was able to pretty rapidly acquire assets and rapidly attract a lot of investor capital because it was a credible alternative to many of the old discredited institutions. I think you're going to see the same thing in the information in other aspects of the trust space, where you'll see people, you'll see the rapid collapse of certain trust-based, trust brokering institutions, but you'll see this hunger for substitutes. People don't want to have to, they don't have to do their own research on every topic, for instance. That's just not a way you can, in a complex world, that's not how you can go through life. And this gets back to some of the earlier points about like how a small group of people in a small community. So you think of what do a lot of small communities have? They often still have very high degrees of trust. In a world where you don't trust distant institutions, where that's at best uncertain, they're building substitute bonds. They're building the sort of trust-based bonds that develop as you go to church every week with people, as you spend time together, as you actually do business with each other in overlapping ways in this community. That creates a rich tapestry of trust that can potentially, and this again depends on whether people are setting themselves up for this, it can potentially be rapidly scaled out as far more people suddenly look to that. And if it has institutions that can serve as a substitute, if it has media that can serve as a substitute that can now help curate and sort of guide people through life, if it has financial institutions or brokerage institutions that are actually brokering transactions or serving as those trust-based intermediaries, you could see a sort of rapid recoherence around pillars of trust that are recognized as solvent. They're recognized as still meriting that, as people are looking for something. So that, I think what you're seeing from the legacy media is something that resembles a bank run. And what you're seeing what you're starting to see is the alternative hubs emerge that, I guess what I'd say is I don't think it's a bank run yet for a lot of the legacy media. I think you're seeing something that's more like the volatility that you often see in the run up to that, where people are recognizing there's problems, there's sort of the signs of problems, but it's unclear how far it goes. But I think you could see a rapid collapse in the case of some of these, as the sort of underlying durable fundamentals are recognized to be pretty sparse.
I think, so this takes us to the third sort of big disruptive event of the last year, which was the acceleration of AI in general, technology. I think, I don't remember the exact date, but OpenAI launched ChatGPT November 4th, I think, last year, or November 3rd. It feels like, think of the amount of acceleration that's happened across Midjourney and other places, but it's only been a year or so. And it feels like AI will accelerate the return to durable trust based communities. I mean, increasingly it seems like you won't be able to, broadly speaking, you won't be able to trust piece of content or a piece of media just off the cuff the way people are used to it.
It undermines, and I wrote about this in Newsweek, it directly undermines the foundations of the legacy status hierarchy. So the legacy status hierarchy was, in many ways, we were an aristocracy of image and an aristocracy of word. And you can think of sort of since JFK, our elites have been people who looked good on television. I mean, looking good was a signal of competence, and it was a reasonable signal of competence. Like, you didn't learn the skills to look good on TV easily in a world where you would sort of learn the polish needed to look good by actually rising in institutions that were probably correlated with actually being fairly competent.
Demanding,
and I would say the same as is aristocracy of word, right? We've been a world where being able to write well, being able to write a good op-ed, being able to write a good paper, those were the being able to write an email that sounds like that clearly sounds like it came from a skilled professional, were all signals of competence. And in many ways, those became the signals that help determine the aristocracy of a professional managerial economy. Again, very reasonable, right? You would learn those skills, you would learn to write that way by rising in the sort of companies where you learn very real skills. Over time, the signal grew to replace the actual underlying, and you ended up with, I think, a very empty world where an MBA probably teaches you it probably teaches you to look like a businessman and sound like a businessman more than it actually taught you to be good at business. So you learn the image. I mean, you meet Harvard MBAs, and they're very good at the image side, and they're very good at writing in ways that sort of signal they're coming from that tribe, but increasingly lacking, I think, substantive business judgment to actually be excellent at anything other than sort of playing that game. And AI in particular, digital has already sort of accelerated this, but AI, I mean, Instagram filters made it sort of cheaper and cheaper for anyone to have that TV quality image. But now with AI, you can create a deep fake that suddenly any image can be faked, and increasingly people are going to very, very rapidly just stop looking at an image as a signal of much of anything. It's become very cheap to produce those. Likewise, the ability to produce words that sound like they came from a college-educated professional. That is, I'm in some ways I'm a skeptic of some of the more ambitious claims about AI. But one thing that GPT is very good at is producing verbiage that sounds like something that a professional, that a college-educated professional would produce. Yeah. And so that signal, again, is going to become rapidly deprecated and rapidly, I guess, inflated away. Yeah. And so you're going to have this sort of a void where there's going to be people aren't going to know how to navigate the world when the signals that they've used to judge credibility are suddenly recognized as worthless, and they're going to look for alternative signals. And my sort of underlying thesis here is they're going to look for skin in the game, something that's a costly signal, because in a digital world where the signals that were they had been costly, they were signals of credibility, become incredibly cheap and incredibly plentiful. Costly signals are not. Costly signals by their very nature cannot be. And you look at costly signals, and sort of one of the most obvious ones is courage. Courage, where you did something where you took a real risk for something, sort of anything. If you took a real risk for it, then that's at least worth paying attention to, because there was real cost in that signal. And I think another one that fits in that category is Bitcoin, proof of work. The very nature, the very foundation of Bitcoin is a costly signal. It's something that is it's work that goes into something. And so I think you're seeing, in many ways, AI is actually going to accelerate. It's going to accelerate the destruction of this managerial, in many ways, increasingly artificial economy. And in many ways, the sort of U.S. financial system is the essence of that. I mean, the U.S. dollar itself can be printed at no marginal cost, and it's going to be displaced by probably a much more really an ancient signal, courage, and I think you'll see a rise of costly digital signals.
Yeah. No, we were talking earlier today, even this is coming up on a daily basis where one of our colleagues heard a faux Joe Rogan endorsement of a product that was a deep fake, and these are right now, they're all over the place, where the tech's gotten good enough that you can...
Oh yeah, he was saying listen to the New Founding podcast.
That's right. Joe Rogan loves the New Founding podcast. People had just taken an episode, chopped it up, added some deep fake, and it was Joe Rogan endorsing X product, and who knows, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars of advertising that they're essentially stealing through these deep fakes. And like any scam, it's going to work really well for a short amount of time, and then people are going to get wise to it, and the value of hearing Joe Rogan endorse something, or even seeing a video of him endorsing something, is going to drop dramatically, probably close to zero.
Yeah.
So like an analog for that would be like phone, telemarketing, where 40 years ago you would answer your phone, whoever it was, you'd say, hello, this is Josh, and you would engage with those people. 20 years ago.
Yeah, I remember picking up the phone at my house. It just rang. We always picked up.
That's no longer the case. People just ignore it as a medium because trust in that medium has dropped to almost zero, and presumably we'll see the same thing with visual and audio.
Well, and that ties in, I guess I missed one, which is costly signals, courage, proof of work, but community, your local community. You invest over time. I mean, just our spending time around the fire together is hours of work that is invested in a relationship, and that is a costly investment in trust. That's why I pick up the phone when Josh calls, but I don't pick up the phone when a random number calls, because I know that there's an established relationship there. There's something that indicates it's worth listening to, and that in turn ties back to the local. I actually think AI will devastate many of the assumptions that underlie a willingness to sort of a default trust, really the foundation of a high trust society, a default trust of distant institutions and distant people.
Yeah. I think remote work is not here to I think it'll stick around in some shape or form, but I do think that, just on the subject, it'd be interesting to see what the deepfake and proliferation of AI does for a lot of these, 5-hour-a-week type remote jobs that are just laptop class types, where even 3 years ago, even during the pandemic, the assumption was if you zoomed in and you showed your face on a call, you were there. Your colleague was there, right? You're not necessarily working.
And
working
pretty
hard.
Famously, during the pandemic, people were holding down 3 such jobs at the same
3 jobs,
time, right?
exactly. And zoom in for 5 seconds. And,
right.
You can see a future where in a couple of years, like in a good way, the people who are just bumming out, making $200,000 a year as a associate product manager at Facebook are just no longer needed in society. Good riddance.
In many ways, they never were, and I think it was a
zero interest rate phenomenon.
Yes.
Yeah. So last of the large sort of disruptive events was Israel-Palestine, but most recently talking about the kerfuffle with Ivy Leagues and the sort of insane realization that a lot of these colleges, a lot of us knew for a long time, but very pointedly realization that they were breeding ground for, terrorists, terrorist supporters. What do you guys think of that?
I think the interesting thing that's been happening ever since the Israel-Gaza conflict broke out is it's really the last time I've seen elites meaningfully divided, like since 2016, basically. I mean, where you had Larry Summers is like savagely critiquing the current administration at Harvard University, and then Bill Ackman has just been on the warpath, with several of the Ivy presidents, and it's ever since Trump, first came down that elevator in New York City, those many years ago. The elite has been very sort of politically unified in most meaningful ways, and so I do think it's interesting that I think the more centrist faction that often has an affinity for Israel is realizing that the left is now an existential threat to Israel and perhaps elsewhere, and that's creating a real rift in the liberal left coalition that is it's meaningful, and for the first time there's sort of meaningful intra-elite competition. Of course, it's all like liberals versus leftists, right? I mean, I don't anticipate meaningful conservative change at any of these institutions, but I think for pertinent to our purposes is, if some of the centrist liberals are sort of wanting to come over to the conservative side or join our coalition, there needs to be some sort of bargain. It has to be something more than a mere, welcome to the party, thanks for coming. There has to be a recognition that liberalism is sort of what enabled the far left to take power in the 70s, and it's been in many ways a faulty project, and that really there needs to be at a minimum acquiescence to an acceptance of an alternative vigorous, I would say, Christian vision for society. And if people are on board with that, great. Like, we welcome your support. But those are my sort of brief thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think the mistake, the common pattern you've seen is as people defect, in a sense, as prominent liberals defect, conservatives have loved, and this is a product in many ways of the sort of legacy captured conservative media that covets. It's a conservative elite that is operating within the left status hierarchy. They covet that approval of the left, and so they get a high status person, and they immediately crown them with great importance in the movement. And I think what we need is a twofold recognition. This is we just don't need to do that. We're not obligated to do that. We have bargaining power here. But B, it goes beyond that. Like, what has happened is the inevitable consequence, as Josh said. It's the inevitable consequence of the sort of moderate liberalism. And these people, they are not going to be safe. They're not going to be safe unless they join and align on the total defeat of the left, because the left is going to destroy them. I mean, what the left did to Gaza, or what the left did to Israel, what the Gazans did to Israel, is very clearly very parallel to what BLM wanted to do to white Americans. It was the exact same language they were using, the exact same imagery. Some of the BLM groups literally retweeted. They tweeted things celebrating that, and so I think it's not new. It's just a realization that this actually extends further. In many cases, I don't even think it was willful blindness. I actually do genuinely believe people can exist in sort of real bubbles, and in that, I mean, elites are people who exist in communities that are very insular in their thinking in many ways. And so I think this wake-up call may truly wake people up. I mean, that doesn't mean they're going to immediately have conservative values, but it may mean that they realize that their only hope is the defeat of the left. And I actually think there's a real chance that Elon's realized this. I mean, I think Elon very possibly realized that he'll never get to Mars if he has to abide by the left's DEI demands or whatever. But he'll also, they're also set on destroying his, economically destroying Twitter. They're not going to tolerate even a little bit of divergence there. And so you have someone who, there's no way, Elon's not a conservative. He's not a Christian. He's not someone who shares a lot of our particular convictions. He's been very clear about that he sees himself as a moderate. But I think he may well be someone who recognizes that he needs to cast his lot with those who are against the left. Yeah. They're at war with our way of life, and that's a existential fight. And I think you'll see other defectors, again, not the institutions, I don't think. I think they're thoroughly captured. And in many cases, that's what's... now, they're going to continue to... They may try to moderate the loss of some of their big donors, but in many ways, I think they're not going to join this. But there will be people who realize that, and they need to be made to realize. I think our standing up, our unwillingness to bend to a sort of moderate liberal position, one that sort of allows, that sort of embraces their victim class status in a way that really allows them to sort of maintain they should be allowed to maintain their position in the left's moral framework. Right. No, what we need to do is we need to make clear, no, this is a war, and they want to destroy us, and they want to destroy everything that you hold dear, and join us in this fight.
I think what's interesting there too is that from afar, the broad, let's say a broad Christian coalition would be popularly seen as too monolithic. If you don't believe every single doctrinal point of the Christian coalition, they're going to kick you out. They're going to not let you in. They're going to hate you. Well, I think it's actually what we're seeing along those lines is the reverse. A Christian coalition has necessary wisdom and ideally prudential considerations in place to consider a larger alliance with people who are not necessarily fully bought into a Christian worldview. The liberal side was seen, again, as the more welcoming. Anybody can come. You don't have to adhere to every single party line. What we've seen in reality is the opposite. Is unless you adhere to every single point of the liberal doctrine, you're actually not just not in, you're an enemy, and you will be destroyed in totality. You're seeing these people are seeing this left, right, and center, where, again, the bigots, the Christians, are actually seen now as more considerate for openness and open coalitions and alliances. I think it's interesting. That's shifted along. Yeah. So what's next? Next year, new founding, lots of irons in the fire. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we'll have more information coming very soon on our real estate efforts in particular. So
the community we talked about at the beginning.
Yes. So that's going to be a large part of my focus in the coming months.
Yeah.
We'll be talking about that publicly. Obviously, there's the venture fund that we stood up a couple months ago that you're sort of driving execution on, and we have a fantastic deal in the pipeline right now that we're working on closing, and a lot more in the works. So we expect to see that to continue to grow. Talent continues to gain traction, and so it's been a very good year. Really have a lot of optimism for this next one.
I think it's in many ways an opportunity for the outlet of a lot of potential. You could think of it as sort of a lot of potential energy buildup. I mean, my thesis going into New Founding was really I had this line: media is the new credit. This ability to, it's particularly the ability to put out a compelling message that would rally people around, is in some ways analogous to raising capital. You're raising trust, you're aggregating trust, and people are waiting to be, in many ways, they're waiting to be directed towards something that will accomplish that. And so seeing things like this real estate community is an outlet for a lot of people where that's the natural outlet for their energy. Venture, really, the venture fund, I mean, we waited years on the venture fund until I felt confident that there was enough traction. There's been a lot of founding teams. There's been a lot of young teams that are very, very high quality founders. I mean, really top tier founding teams, very serious skin in the game. They'll bootstrap, for instance. They're working at a top tier that are getting to the point where they're ready for funding. And so that's now an opportunity to deploy a lot of what we've worked on. And there's another project that Josh and I are working on that is aiming to use digital technology to, at a very wide scale, be able to integrate, help facilitate interactions among local and aligned communities. And that's a huge need. It's a huge problem. There's no sort of obvious and easy way of doing it. There's ways that have done it at certain levels, but so much of the hunger for that has not yet been realized, and it's because of the complexity of these problems. I mean, you're trying in many ways to help replace legacy institutional networks that are incredibly complex and established, and so that's a project I'm incredibly excited about. And then I think lastly, there's this just exciting growth of the new Christian right and the communities that are fired up around whether it's Christian nationalism or other alternatives there. I mean, you can sense the energy, you can sense the increasing hysteria of the other side. This new documentary, this Rob Reiner documentary, featuring sort of a predictable cast of characters who, in many ways, have tried to maintain a veneer. Some of them have tried to maintain a veneer of sort of moderation, and now they're all appearing together in a documentary produced by Rob Reiner attacking Christians for really any sort of substantive involvement in politics. I mean, they wouldn't do that. They don't. these people aren't stupid. They don't draw attention to something. They have big microphones. They're not going to draw attention to something unless they see it as a threat. And I think the energy there is really one of the bright spots in terms of a rich and deeply motivating substantive alternative to the present regime, and that is only gaining energy, and I expect that to continue very, very rapidly. And the reason that one will grow so rapidly, I think, is it draws on what really is deep in the American. I mean, America remains a deeply Christian country, even compared to most other countries. There's higher church attendance. Yeah. It's deeply that country is deeply Protestant in our culture. It's something where it's shaped how we think about political norms in a way that I think something that is grounded in that tradition and yet different can resonate with a very wide cross section of people. Everyone from sort of disillusioned mainline church elites who are politically disillusioned with us, going all the way to just sort of vast numbers of people across the Bible Belt who really hang on to the essence of that and recognize that their own elites are not leading them in a way that aligns with the substance of their faith. So you see a tremendous amount of energy there, and that really plays into many of these others as well. I mean, that's going to be, you think of just the vast sort of numbers in the base of any alternative vision, and it's going to come from people from that world.
Yeah. Any final highlights of this last year? It's kind of a year in review for the World New Founding. Any notable thoughts or standouts? For me, I'll start. One of the things, just across the board of all our projects, conversations, from the podcast to people have come to our office to people that reach out via DMs to all, in all of our Twitter accounts or X accounts, is just the quality of people who are motivated to do something now. Where I would say, even a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, when I started here, when I joined, the momentum was still building, but people were still sort of figuring out, like, do I need to get involved? Is this just kind of cool to follow? And now, whether it's people wanting to deploy capital that's into building the country they want to live in, or build the country they want to live in, or hire people who align with that, or move to places where they can, usher in that vision. In my mind, this year, I can't pinpoint exactly when, but there was a market transition between racing the credit fund, as it were, and then starting to deploy it through the media fund, and then starting to move people, and people being receptive to that time to build, that time to move, the time to go. So this is sort of a standout in my mind across conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're seeing a lot of areas where there's so much pent-up demand, and you start to lead in the right way, and the acclaim and the backing follows exceptionally quickly. Mm-hmm. So that strengthens our conviction levels, and I mean, we're what we've been building over the last 2 years has created a network that, like, sort of puts us in a position to solve these complex collective action problems, essentially. And so as we start to do that, I mean, it's great to sort of see the various pieces coming together from what we've been building in a way that is making a real difference in the real world, and increasingly, quickly at an increasingly larger scale.
Yeah.
I'll reiterate that, and I'll say that you can feel the energy. You can feel that, and again, you can feel that it's a time, I think, of great uncertainty in the political world, in the sort of electoral world, and the political world there. But you can feel the energy in the digital domain, in the private domain, in the Christian domain. The balance is changing in ways that I think are recognized. I mean, very, very basic things like people, like follower accounts on Twitter are starting to sort of clear reach is starting to exceed certain legacy channels in many spaces. You have dissident people like you have people like Chris Rufo who are able to challenge and put on the defensive large legacy institutions. You have real change in Florida. You have real change in even in Texas. We have sort of real excitement around. You could say that what's happening in Austin is rivaling what's happening in San Francisco in many ways. It's not a second tier. It certainly it doesn't remain the same caliber of venture capital or anything, but the biggest players are there, and some of the biggest things are happening there. And so you see a clear sense that there's the early stages of a counter elite. Or at least of a dissident elite. I think it's a dissident elite that's starting to, if not all cohere as a counter elite, they're starting to cohere as a counter elite. They're starting to firmly stand against the regime in ways that make clear that there's going to be real opposition, and simultaneously that then creates the hunger and the opportunity for alternative, positive vision.
Yeah.
It's about to wrap.
Good stuff, y'all.
Yeah.
All right.
This is
Good
good.
conversation.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the New Founding Podcast. New Founding has become a rallying point for founders and investors who are taking serious bets in the face of a stagnant business culture. Our venture fund backs founders building dynamic companies, powered by American ideals and a positive national vision. These are the kinds of founders that embody the optimism and competence of the people who come on this podcast. If you're interested in investing in our fund, check out newfounding.com/venture fund and follow the link to apply.